Alright, so today's video, it's actually going to be the first in a two-part episode. This first part is called a new triumvirate. I believe the proper pronunciation in Latin is Triumvirate, but I say triumvirate. I don't know if that's correct or not. So most people are probably wondering, what the fuck is a triumvirate? The triumvirate was a political alliance during the latter stages of the Roman Republic, and it is my opinion that we are Rome. The entirety of Western civilization models itself off of the Roman Empire. So countries like Spain, Britain, Germany, that fetid swamp of a land we call France, they all have their beginnings from the Roman Empire, all of which were colonies except for Germany. And of course, America was discovered and founded by Europeans. So they would have brought that over during the colonial period. And the founding fathers, being British citizens, but also educated in classical, I guess, the European history, would have known that, especially because there's so many references to Rome. Alexander Hamilton wrote under the pen name Publius. George Washington, when he did not run for a third term, he looked at Cincinnatus as a model for that, and that's where the city of Cincinnati come from. Memphis was a city in Lower Egypt that was eventually incorporated into the empire. Philadelphia was a city in the Eastern Roman Empire. Thomas Jefferson models the Monticello off of Roman architecture, anything really with the pillar. The memorial to Lincoln has fasces underneath his hands. The fasces was a ceremonial axe that was carried by the bodyguards of the consuls, I believe, and that was a symbol of power. That's where the word fascism comes from, because Mussolini used it as his symbol. And just any real European monarchy, the word Caesar gives rise to the word Tsar in Russian, and the Romanov family, the Romanovs, and the word Kaiser in German comes from Caesar. We use Latin phrases all the time: e pluribus unum, semper fidelis. On the back of the dollar bill, it says Novo Ordo Seclorum. So they were obviously aware of the Roman Empire. Use of an eagle. The eagle was what the Roman standards for the legionaries would have used. The word eagle is actually derived from the Latin word for eagle, which is aquila. So I don't speak Latin. I don't want to just harp on the Romans and make this into some Roman Empire fanboy site. But as far as influence, the Romans are just a good metaphor for America. Obviously, there was empires and societies before that to influence them: the Greeks, the Assyrians, the Egyptians, all that. The Chinese history plays, and Mongolian history is very important to the West, but nothing is more important than the Roman Empire. And this is going to set up the second part of this video, and this might sound kind of crazy, but I believe our manifest destiny really ends with a Latina emperor. I believe that Latinas are the master race. Now, it's probably offensive to a lot of people saying that Latinos are the master race, and people are probably going to get offended by that, and I'm pretty sure that violates some kind of community standards on YouTube, but it just is what it is. It is what it is. They are going to take over this country, and they are going to inherit it if it collapses, which I mean it might. But again, that's part 2 of this video. Part 1 is about the triumvirate. So if you look at our federal government, obviously there are three branches: the Supreme Court, the executive, and the legislative branch. And the legislator is broken down into two houses: the House of Representatives and the House of the Senate. It's a bicameral legislature. And the House of Representatives is led by the Speaker of the House, and the President of the Senate is actually the Vice President. So the Vice President is also the President pro tempore of the Senate. Again, President pro tempore is a Latin phrase. But then the third branch is the executive, um, and that is obviously led by the President, who is the Commander in Chief. And it's these three people: the Speaker of the House, the Vice President / President pro tempore, and the President, that I think is set up to be a triumvirate of the Republic. Now, the Roman Republic didn't just fall in a day. It's about a good couple decades and generations before it actually went from republic to empire. And it is the triumvirate, the political alliance between Julius Caesar, Pompey the Great, and Marcus Crassus, that was running the republic. Now, unfortunately, the people running our government right now are Joe Biden, Nancy Pelosi, and Kamala Harris. So I think it's important to define what each branch of government is really supposed to do. Because I feel like a lot of people just complain about the government because you kind of can, and no one's really going to defend the government, really. Personally, I think the problem is obviously the people running the government. I think if you study the Constitution and we acted in a way that is necessitated by the Constitution, then we wouldn't really have any problems. So the job of SCOTUS is to only interpret the Constitution and to find out if a law is constitutional or not. It's not supposed to be making any kind of laws. The president, I think a lot of people think that the president makes laws, and they seem to act in a way where they're voting for a friend. It's weird. Maybe that's just me. The president is the head of your military. He's the commander in chief. And he also deals with foreign affairs. He's your top diplomat. In the Constitution, in Article 2, which lays out the executive branch, it's only 3 sections. And he's the commander in chief, number one. He controls your armed forces. He deals with foreign affairs. He can negotiate treaties, stuff like that. And then the third one is he just appoints people to the Supreme Court, pretty much. And he fills vacancies as they arrive. He's not really supposed to have a lot of domestic power. All of the domestic power lies within Congress. And Congress, as I said earlier, is a bicameral legislature. It's 2 houses: the Houses of Representatives and the House of the Senate. The House of Representatives represent you, and that's why they're called representatives. The leader of the House is the Speaker, and the Speaker right now is Nancy Pelosi, and she is also third in line to be the president if anything were to happen to both president and vice president. We've only had one Speaker of the House go directly to president, and that was Gerald Ford, because Richard Nixon and his vice president, Agnew, had to resign. But in the event, if anything were to happen to Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, Nancy Pelosi would become the commander-in-chief. Now, the Senate doesn't represent the people. I think that when people complain about government and the politics, again, they just think that everyone represents them. No, most people are represented by the House of Representatives. The Senate is supposed to be in charge of the business. The entrepreneurs, they are the upper house. They control the wealth, and they represent money. That's why each state gets 2. So there's 100 senators, and the House of Representatives is based off population. I think there's like 455 representatives. But the 100 senators just represent business and the rich people. And if you look at American politics, rich people are represented. So the Senate arguably is the only uh, part of the federal government that's actually doing its job. So me personally, I don't feel like term limits should be applied to the Senate, because you're gonna do what you're gonna get 2 term limits for 6 years each. That's 12 years. That's a generation. So, and again, they're not representing you. They're representing business of whatever particular state they're from. So if the business people in North Dakota want a senator to run for 3 terms and represent them for 18 years, then I don't see why that should be limited. That's just me. I know everyone's like, term limits for the Senate, and then they don't actually think why they want term limits. Like, what would that do except limit capital? It's just a leftist commie gobbledygook, in my opinion. I don't know, maybe I could be wrong, because you don't hear about representatives having term limits, and they represent us for 2 years. So if the people want a particular representative to represent them for 4 terms, that's 8 years, why should business people have the right to tell us no? I think that way for the 22nd Amendment. Why is the president limited to 2 terms? Because you couldn't beat him? I don't know. It just seems kind of weird. But speaking of the president, he's the commander in chief. And it's weird to me that people have this idea that having military experience is bad for a president. I think there should only be 2 professions that qualify you to be a president, and that's a soldier or a lawyer. And most of our presidents in history have been both, actually. Now, I never served in the military. I want to throw that out there. But I feel like the president should be a military veteran. And that, I think of the primary election in 2000, when George Bush used that against McCain, saying that he could have PTSD and bullshit like that. That's where we really fucked up. We should have had John McCain as our president in 2000. And it's these 3 people: the Speaker of the House, the President of the Senate, and the President, Commander-in-Chief. These are the 3 people who run the federal government, or are at least supposed to. Outside any kind of like shadow government, deep state, just on the surface, the people who should be running the government are the Speaker, the President pro tempore, and the President. And that is the Triumvirate. Now, during the Roman Republic, which again did not just suddenly collapse, it was a generational turn into empire. Now, there are way better videos out there about the actual historical happenings of the Triumvirate and all that. But basically, these 3 people, Julius Caesar, Pompey the Great, Marcus Crassus, would have a breakdown. The balance of powers was lost, and they went to civil war, the Roman Civil War. Obviously, Julius Caesar came out victorious, and he proclaimed himself dictator for life, which is not emperor, because in Julius Caesar's mind, he was trying to save the Republic. And, he would have done a pretty good job for it, but he was assassinated in 44 BC by a bunch of senators, all who claimed that they were doing it because he was a tyrant, but really they were probably just mad that he was fucking their wives. Fake news, I guess. So he is assassinated, and then the second triumvirate, Octavian, Mark Antony, and Marcus Aemilius Lepidus, form, and they hunt down the senators who assassinated him, and they continue the civil war. And then eventually Mark Antony and Octavian would go to war with each other. Mark Antony had Cleopatra on his side, and then Octavian would defeat him at the Battle of Actium, and then he would proclaim himself the true emperor of the Roman Empire. He is the first official emperor. And unfortunately, I think this is where we're heading. I think the balance of powers is being lost. People don't really respect the Constitution or the process you're supposed to go through to get your way. They just whine and complain, rig elections, which didn't happen. I don't know why I would even think that. It's obviously a conspiracy theory. The government would never do that. And it's not so much like actual politicians fighting amongst each other. It's just you see that among actual people. You see it on social media. Um, there's no real discourse or debate. It's all just vitriol and sort of anger. And I think that that is going to lead us to a second civil war. And we will no longer be the United States of America after that. We're either going to be the United Socialist States of America, or we are going to be the American Empire. And you're going to see someone like Augustus rise up and just take power, and that'll be it. The president and the speaker will merge into one position, where you're going to have somebody who has foreign and military power, but also has the domestic capabilities. And it's just going to be an autocratic system. I do think that if that were to happen, the future emperor would at least care for America somewhat. It wouldn't want to be. It wouldn't be what you see now, where people just kind of shit all over America and everything has to go. It'll be like Augustus, where like he took over the republic and he transformed it into something, you know, uh, arguably better. He started the Pax Romana, the Roman peace, and he stabilized a lot of the domestic conflict, and people like order. It's just that's what peace is. Peace is not benevolence. Peace is order. And someone will rise up from all this turmoil, and they will make America peaceful again. And the reason I think that didn't happen during our Civil War was because I think both sides were still fighting for America. Different viewpoints of America, but they were still fighting for America, where now you have one side is fighting for America, and then they sort of fight amongst each other. Not fight, but debate amongst each other. They don't have a unified version of America. So you would have like evangelicals, libertarians, etc. on the right who, they have an idea of America and what they want, but it's not a uniformed idea, which it doesn't really need to be because we're a union of states. But on the other side, you have these people who just want to destroy America, and through whatever revolution they're trying to make, create this utopia and do create a communist society. And so that's not very American. They're very anti-religious. They think religion is the opiate of the masses. And so I think because of that, it won't be a civil war to reestablish American values. It'll be American values versus, I guess, the enemy of America, and communist values. And, there's not going to be a compromise. They're anti-federalist. That's what anti-federalist means. It means being opposite of a compromise, opposite of a treaty. And there's going to be no compromise. And I really think I would love if something were to come about where the Constitution was restored and everything would go back to just, being balanced and orderly. That would take a lot of time, because there's just so many people who are not going to listen and who are not going to change their ways to compromise in the first place. And so, yeah, I think the Republic is headed to a second civil war, and that's unavoidable. And I would much rather have an emperor than, Joseph Stalin, I guess. And in many ways, we need an emperor. We kind of need somebody who can bring everything together, reestablish order, maybe check some people, put them in their place. here and there. You know, we kind of need an emperor. It's going to lead me into my second video for for the first Latina emperor of the United States. Latinos are the master race, and this is their country to take over and lead.